Hello and welcome to another episode of Future Learners. I'm your host, Brett Campbell, Chairman and CEO of Euka Future Learning, and I'm joined by my amazing host, as co-host, as always, the one and only, the most beautiful Ellen Brown, our founder and also our head of education. How are you, Ellen?
I'm always great after an introduction like that, Brett. Thank you very much.
Oh, you earned every word of it, Ellen. You earned every word of it. So today we're talking about a specific topic that these are the type of topics that I believe we could probably sit here and do a 6 hour podcast, and myself I wouldn't get bored of it because of the actual, I think the um, not just specifically the topic, but the outcome of said topic. I think is the really important part. And we have done a version of this in previous episodes, and that podcast was all about raising young girls. And Alan, you put this topic on the table today, and it is the opposite of that. It is raising young boys. Whilst there's many similarities, there's also many differences that we will be able to unravel and peel back the layer of the onion today as we sort of get stuck into this. But before we do get into the show, once again, thank you for tuning in, listening, leaving us reviews. If you've done that, you get 27 points. If you left us a 5-star review, you get a bonus 6 points on top of that. And if you leave us a comment, a nice comment, I'll give you 344 points. So if you want to get in the points, please go and do all those cool things that you can do. Share these videos. But all jokes aside, if you do get value from anything that myself and Ellen share and talk about on this show, we would really appreciate it if you could share an episode or even the show itself with any one that you think would also get benefit from these conversations. That is what we're trying to do here: is open up and start conversations. We're not here to solve the Rubik's Cube of life, although that would be an amazing thing to try and solve. I don't think you'd ever solve it, to be fair. So we'd never have run out of topics to talk about then. But Ellen, I want to get into this conversation with you. We both come from very different angles, or not even angles. I think we both come to it from very different life circumstances, which I think is, and again, you're a mother of several young boys, and I am not, but I have been, and still sometimes, according to my wife, act like a young boy. So we're going to be able to give very different outlooks and different viewpoints, which I think is great for conversation. So I'm going to hand to you, Alan, and say, where would you like to start?
Well, I'd really like to start by saying, what we're really wanting to do is empower parents in their role, when they're raising boys, like we did when we talked about raising girls and how you can be aware of some of the nuances about raising girls, and this time about boys, because certainly there are some differences. Obviously, I want to say that it's a blurry crossover, so you'll have some girls that are needing some of this information too. So if you've only got girls, don't be turned off that we're talking about raising boys, because it'll be really helpful for you to
Mm.
understand, and you might even see some things that are helpful for you. But I guess we're going to start. Like you said, I have 4 boys of my own, and in many years of teaching, I certainly had plenty of boys in the classroom, and that has, even though I'm not a boy, it gives me some insight
Mm.
into some of the things that I have done, both as a parent and as a teacher, in helping young boys develop and be the best that I can support and help them to be. So maybe the first place to start is, a part of the topic I've got written here is understanding and nurturing emotional intelligence, because obviously there's stereotypes around being a boy or being a man, and that's something that I think in this generation, young parents are starting to look at how can we break those stereotypes. What would you like to say to that, Brett?
Oh, there's a big piece to unpack there. We've actually done episodes on emotional intelligence where we've deep dived into emotional intelligence, because before we can talk to emotional intelligence, we need to unpack what it is, right? And that's that ability to have self awareness, self regulation, empathy, and so on and so forth. So a number of elements that unpack there. What I'd like to preface by saying is that I truly do believe that we are a framework of our environment and our upbringing in many ways. You can have two people. I mean, I even look at and I go back through time and myself and other friends that I had at a younger age. Yeah, you could say we're a proxy of a very similar environment and upbringing, but as we've grown older, we've taken different paths, and that's absolutely um, okay, and that is what it is in many cases. And sometimes I don't really like the "it is what it is" situation because it's almost like a get out of jail free card. But again, I'm a massive believer in things happen um, because they're supposed to happen, and there's no other way to unreconcile it because it actually did happen, right? So if it happens, it happened for an exact reason. You don't need to know what that is. But what I will say is the development of anyone, and I'll again double tap on this just for a real quick one is I'm looking at this through the lens of myself as a very young boy. I was in an environment where at a very young age I took it upon myself um, to try and become the man of the family. So, my mum, my sister, and myself, we separated from my father when I was 4 years old due to a pretty horrific circumstance. And I grew up without that immediate role model male in my life. So my entire life was, as a kid, was trying to search for that. Who is that role model? And I quickly realized that I again burdened myself by saying, "Well, I don't need anyone, and I'll figure this out." And that's sort of the blessing and a curse for me as I've sort of grown up. So I'm sharing this through that lens of I wasn't given the silver spoon, and anything I wanted in my life, if I've had to go out and get it, I've had to work for it. And I quickly realized if you want to get things, you have to act a certain way, and you have to, as I sort of grew up, it was I had that uncanny ability to be able to when I was 16, 17, I was able to talk to 40, 45 year olds, 50-year olds, and also 10-year olds and 17-year olds and be able to relate because I quickly realized that in order for me to achieve what I was wanting to achieve in life at that stage, which again was a proxy of my environment, I had to learn these sort of tools on the fly. And as I became a young man and I had that what I would call my first early midlife crisis of who am I, what am I here for, what was my reason for existing, as I believe a lot of young men go through, um, and that was my quest on to find out those answers to the question, which led me down self-discovery, which led me down learning and wanting to understand answers to certain questions that I had. So I was a very self-exploratory person. And I just wanted to frame that because even to this day, um, I'm 41 years old, or young, 41 years young. That's what I should be saying. 41 years old, and I am still searching to how can I be a better man. Even to the point where, and I'll recommend this book. It's a pretty tough book, but it's called El Discreto, and it's called The Complete Man, and it's a book actually based in 1646. It was written by a Spanish author, Baltasar Gracian, and it was the philosophy even back then. You look at this in 1664, the philosophies on what it means to be a great man. I mean, I look at all this. The book's broken up into 25 different segments, and you look at the chapters, and I read it here today, sitting at 2024, and not a lot has changed. When you read it, I can fundamentally agree with all of these positions on what it means to be a complete man. Now, I share that because this is the big predicate to it all is you're not going to be able to listen to a podcast or you're not going to be able to uh, watch a documentary or read a single book and all of a sudden you're a great man or you're a great woman or whatever the theme may be. You have to work at it, right? And it's exposure to certain ways of thinking which is the unlock for, I believe, our children as they're growing older. So we've talked about this again and we'll continue talking about this point is value systems and how you set up your family for success is really a an absolute predicate to success as you are raising young boys. So that was a long non-answer to your actual initial question though, Alan. um, but I wanted to preface that by saying that is the viewpoint in which I look at this, because you can hear me talking about my points of view, and if you don't have a specific point of view, sometimes people can latch onto a point of view and take it on as their own, but you haven't been exposed to the line of thinking of how I arrived at that point of view, right? So that's something that I really wanted to make sure that I stated from the start. So I talked that much, Alan, that I forgot what your initial question even was.
I had a feeling that might happen actually. So we were talking about the importance of breaking stereotypes. That whole, you're a man,
Of course,
suck it
yeah,
up. You don't need, like
yeah,
you were saying, you don't need anybody else to talk to about something. You can handle this and work it out for yourself. So I
yeah,
guess, on a practical side, as a parent on a practical side, I've always been an advocate of talking about things from when they're very young to
yep,
help them understand that that's actually quite natural, so that when they do come into a time, and I find that interesting, they come into those teenage years, and the funny thing is that you might have got it really, you're thinking to yourself, I am honestly a winner. Look at me, my boys and I, we're talking, we can talk about it. They hit teenagerhood, and all of a sudden the conversations are a little bit less or a lot less depending on the boy, and so I feel like putting that work in when they're young to say, we can talk about it. You can get upset about something, and then helping them to learn how to
mm,
deal with those emotions in a reasonable and right way, because they deal with them quite differently to girls in my
yeah,
experience, and then understanding that when you get to those teen years and the conversations are a bit less, they share a little bit less about what's going on in their personal lives, that you've built a foundation there, so that when something really important needs to be talked about, or there is an emotional, they will come at that point because you've set that groundwork while they're young. I would just say that I think, it's obviously wonderful if boys have got a dad in the house, and dad is the one who can say, "Oh, gee, I feel upset about something," and share. And that way, that's absolutely ideal. And as a single
mm,
mum, it's been it's been something I've been very conscious about, not raising boys in a way that they're just they're needing to be able to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm seeing, this is what's happening, and then you need them to develop some toughness about whether you're a boy or
yep,
a girl. Develop some
yep,
toughness, and say, okay, how can I learn from that? How can I move forward in a really practical way, I suppose.
yep.
So yeah, so breaking the stereotype, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, but I think the first thing before we break a stereotype, we need to identify what is the stereotype and what are we actually aiming towards, right? So I was just mentioning the book there called The Complete Man, um, and that is, in essence, what the belief around how do you become a complete man. Now, there's a what's the definition of a complete man, right? As well, so we can go down those rabbit holes. But I think the starting point is what are we trying to aim to achieve, right? Like we're raising our daughters, we're raising our sons, and it's like, what does success look like? I think that's the first parameter. Like we need to go, what does success look like? So when my son is, 17, 18, 16, 17, 18, and they're ready to move out of home or embark on that next quest of life to again go and figure it out themselves, because there's only so much sheltering you can do for your child, which I think is in essence, if you haven't pre-thought about that, then you do shelter your children. Or a lot of people do shelter their children in many ways and not prepare them for the big wide world. And I look at parenting as we're in preparation to prepare my children for when they do depart or leave the nest, so to speak, right? Um, I had friends, and it was quite interesting because as I was growing up, I I despised some of the things that my mother would make me do, only because I had friends where their mothers would do it. Like I had a friend, I'd go and stay at his house, and literally we'd walk inside and just like sit on the couch, and his mum would be like, "Do you guys want any food?" And this was when we were like 17, 18, and we're in our first jobs. Like we were working and we're, earning a couple $100 a week, and so we're out there. We weren't children anymore. We'd sit down and she'd be cooking food, and then she'd be doing the laundry, and she'd be folding up his laundry. And then we go into his room and I'm like, where's your laundry? He goes, oh, my mum put it away. And I was just like gobsmacked. I was like, your mum even puts it away for you. Like, what do you even do? Like, I was just shocked because my mum would wash our clothes, but it was up to me to, to put it away and put it in my drawers. And in my head, I'm like, oh man, mum, why can't you do that? But in essence, right, it did not prepare my mate well for when he moved out of home because he didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know how to take care of himself.
Mm.
It was literally, hey, mum, can you come around? I'm like, my goodness. But the point there is, I think what we need to do first and foremost is try and set ourselves up for going, what are we trying to prepare for here? Okay. And what does it mean? Like, if I was to come over to your house and I was to observe your son, um, what would what are the things that you would like to occur? Like what behaviors would you like your son to have? Would you like your son to say, hello, Mr. Campbell, or how are you today? Would you like them to interact? Would you like them to say hello? Would you like them to sit there on their game right next to you while you do, like, what type of environment would you like to create? And that's really the starting point, because at the end of the day, everyone, well, most people, most parents can differ quite a lot in the way that they want to have their environment, and that's totally cool as long as you're aware of that is what it is for you, right? But there are some core fundamental um, talking points that I think it just should be generic through every single family, right? And happy we can break those down as well. But when it comes to these stereotypes, is it's a double-edged sword sometimes, because and it comes down to how prepared your child is to be able to handle the narrative. And I'll give you an example. Meaning, when I went into the workforce circa, 25 years ago, I was bullied at work by my boss. And it emotionally took me by surprise, because I was like, why are you bullying me? Like, I'm not a bad person. I'm trying my best to do the work here, and I'm actually feel like I'm doing really good. But it was sort of, that was just the nature of it. However, I took that and I flipped that on its head. And again, I'm the person who will always try and make lemonade. Um, what was that saying? Make lemonade.
No, you, yeah,
Make lemonade
make
out of
lemon.
lemons. That's where I
Yeah.
was going. So I make lemonade out of lemons, right? And I said that because I literally used to make lemonade and sell it. But anyway, so I would always see it from the positive sense. And that's actually been one of my biggest blessings, because that taught me how I was never going to be as a leader in an organization, which is the frame in which I look at how I work with anyone in this day and age. So not all people, though, are capable of taking that bullying instance and flipping it on to be a positive, right? I feel those are some things that I believe there's an innate, right? There's an innate ability that we all naturally have. Some have more of it, some have less of it. And if you've identified that your child doesn't have, how would I frame it? Have that natural bounce back, and they are affected. Like, you could say something mean to me and I might cry. I might have cried about it, but then in an hour I'm like back on, and you could tell it didn't affect me. But if your child does get heavily affected by those certain things, then that's the attention sign. That's the siren going off to go, hey, we need to apply these things differently, because the whole stereotype of men can't talk. It's you shouldn't speak. It's weak to speak. All of those things. It's become a massive problem in this day and age. I was literally looking at the study a couple of weeks ago with teenagers aged 15 to 24. There's a 510% increase in anxiety in young men from 2010 to 2020. Like, that's a massive, and lots of it is built upon the inability to speak and not wanting to speak because you have to be strong and you have to be this. Now, I believe men should be strong, right? But being strong, again, you have to define what strong means. I cry quite a lot. It's a great expressive emotion to be able to do it, right? Doesn't mean you're weak. But before I go down again, a couple of other avenues here, I think the key to all of what we're talking about here is really establishing a starting point, right? And we really need to see what the effect of said something is, because you can say something to a child and go, "Stop being a sook, get up and do it," and that might be something. Okay, no, you're right. But if you keep saying that and it's more of a degrading insult, it's just you might need to change your tact, because not all people can be communicated to in the same way.
Mm. Yeah, I saw this firsthand actually. When I was teaching at a school for kids that had been permanently expelled from the public school system, and they were
Mm,
really about to move into juvenile justice. And these were kids, these were not high school kids. Some of these kids are still in the in the later primary school age. And I was a new teacher and thought, oh, I'll do something lovely with these boys. I was in charge of the boys. I was in charge of behavior management. I think that's because I was the newest teacher and someone had to be in charge of it. So they gave it to me. So I thought, oh, well, look, you know what? I'll take the boys down the oval. We didn't have a playground. I'll take them down the oval and we'll play hockey. It didn't occur to me that I was giving every child a weapon, and we'd go down the oval and it was an
mm,
all in brawl, and it started really between two key kids. And there was they they're all armed, and but these kids were about probably about 11 years old. These boys, all boys,
yeah.
about 11 or 12 years old. Anyway, um, I quickly saw, and it was often the same boy who was the instigator of things, and I grabbed the one. I thought I grabbed the right one, and I'm holding from behind. I'm holding around so that he could stop hitting. Where then he gets hit, and I realize I'm holding the kid that's getting hit. So I quickly grabbed the other one, and we walked away around the corner. Everything kind of lulled. Another teacher ran from another part of the oval, and everything
Mm,
sort of settled down. I took him around the corner. Soon as we got around the corner, and he's swearing, carrying on, and he's pretending like he's trying to get away, but he's not. We get around the corner, he bursts into tears, like, and I saw this young boy, he was just a kid, and I realized at
mm,
that point, this exterior, this feeling already at that age of we're supposed to be tough and we're supposed to be defending, we're supposed to be, and it was so ingrained in him, where when he was taken away from that atmosphere and he had the opportunity to just be a kid and be a person
mm.
and talk it through, like, honestly, he working with that boy and seeing the transformation when he started to realize there's power in listening, there's power in sharing and talking, and you don't have to hit to be powerful, was a really big lesson that I learned about stereotypes, and how, in some, like you said, it's the way you're raised, but then
Yeah,
getting to the point in your life, it doesn't matter what age your boys are getting to, they can get to the point where they can start to see there's power in listening and talking and sharing.
yep,
Then doesn't matter what's come before, there to see that their transformation can come. And
yep,
the other thing that I jumped on, I thought about when you thought about, you were talking about your friend and the mom, and honestly, if I followed my heart, I'd be that person. I'd be, oh,
yep,
here's your socks. That would be me all over, because I've got that natural nurturing. But I actually feel a real responsibility to my future daughters-in-law. Like, I
yep,
keep thinking to myself, one day we're going to have Christmas and there's going to be four daughters-in-law sitting around, and they're going to be like, oh, at least he can cook and he can clean. I call them the bachelor arts. They have to be able to cook, they do all their own washing, even from young. I teach them, they know how to put the water in, because I really feel like they know they're part of a family. We're all working together, we're doing our thing, but it makes for harmony. And so, as a parent, I have to go against my natural desire to nurture and be, I mean, still nurturing, but I know that there is importance in them learning some of these skills, so that yes,
mm,
they could be out and doing their own thing, but one day they're going to be part of a family themselves. I want to raise great men that will be great husbands one day as well. So,
mm.
something to
Well,
keep in mind.
that right there is the key to it all. It's the what are we trying to aim towards? What does success look like? It's when you're and you don't need to look at every decision you make every single day when your child's young and go, oh, this is going to affect them when they're 24, 25, 26, etc. However, having your natural prism and the way you look at things through that lens, I think, is very, very important, because, there's lots of things in how I handle situations with Ayla, right? she's 3 years old, and I want to give her everything, but I also realize that why am I wanting to give her everything? And it's just because, oh, when I was little, I didn't get that, so why can't I give it to her? So there's always a retraction back to some reason as to why you want to. And whether it's you're wanting to do all these things because that's your validation of love and that's how you feel you're getting love back because you're doing all these things, and that means they must, like, there's always a trickle on effect if we reverse engineer it back to why am I doing that? Right? Versus am I setting my child up for success? It's like one of the rules in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is, and I don't know it off the top of my head exactly, but it's essentially um, don't allow your kid to grow up to be disliked by other adults. It's in that vein, right? And it's the um, you don't want your kid to, and this is where it starts in the early years, like discipline when they're 2.5, 3, 4, 5, and you're not letting them get away with murder, and you're towing the line, and you're starting to build those value systems in your children in those very early years. Because if you're as soon as your kid goes to stay at a friend's house, I'll tell you what, if they're an asshole of a kid, they are not going to get an invite back again, right? I made such a big effort, and I'm so glad my mum did this. A couple of really big things was manners. Always, and always say hello, Mister and Mrs. and don't call them by their first name unless they give you permission to. Right? Take your shoes off. Always offer to do the dishes and clean up after yourself whenever you're at anyone's house after dinner. Don't just sit on the couch and, like I'd stay at my friend's house, he'd sit on the couch and I'd go and ask his mum if she wanted help with the dishes and I'd help dry them. Right? Guess who got invited back? And even like I was a pleasure to have stay. Right. So that was because for me it was important to show that level of respect first. So make sure that what we're instilling here is not just are they going to have a great wife or a husband when they're older. It's like, are they going to have friends? Like, is someone else going to want to hang out with them? Right now, there's always a group and community for everyone, but it's majority of people. If you instill really good, strong behaviors, a good moral compass, then everything else, we can bump our knees and bruise our elbows as we sort of try and figure this out as parents, because it's not easy, right? It's super not easy. Like it's from my perspective, it's actually one of the hardest endeavors I think anyone will ever go on, is to be a parent, right? In many ways, because um, you are a starting point for the potential outcome of that child's future. So I look at the breakdown of the nuclear family, right? The breakdown of like this the fatherless homes, and you look at that by divorce rates. Circa 50% of people are getting married or getting divorced these days. So there's a massive conversation even within that, because I do believe every household, there are roles and responsibilities within every household. I do believe that the mother has responsibilities in the household that the father doesn't have. And I also believe the father has responsibilities that the mother doesn't have, and vice versa, right? There's certain things that should be incorporated into. Like, I believe it's the father's role is to test the child's physical ability do that rough and tumble, and that starts at the very early ages. You know, the rough and tumble, and be that sort of physical barrier and push them to their limits to show them what they can and can't do, et cetera, right? And the mother is generally the more nurturing side of that, and that's because I guarantee you, anytime your child's sick, they're not running, generally would not be running to dad. They're going to mum, because the mum is the heart. Now, it doesn't mean dad doesn't have a heart, but we're biologically wired this way. There's a reason why females are actually having the child itself, and basically fathers remain useless for the first several several weeks and months to start with in the very early years. But when I say fathers remain useless, I actually got a flip on that, because I've got two friends right now who've just had babies, and the father's like, "Oh, what do I do?" I said, "I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to support the mother. Like, you're there to support the mother, right? Through this. Not, you can't breastfeed your child and, do all these things, but here's the areas that you can." So I definitely feel that setting those sort of initial base standard philosophies is the most important part, because, and maybe we'll do a podcast about this, about like teenage as we sort of transition from the teenage years to the young male years, because that's a very different conversation
mm,
as it
mm,
relates to the school years. But um, the biggest thing I think that any family, and if I said, yeah, if you ask me, what's the number one thing that you could teach a young boy as they're growing up, um, through life to be successful. Um, I can't. I've got two answers because I can never go past learn how to communicate effectively, right, and learn how to build relationships. That's primary. That'll always be my number one answer. But sitting directly next to that is be respectful to women. Like that to
mm,
me,
mm,
like, and it doesn't mean like women are right all the time, and you just bow down and yes, yes, yes. It's you show respect, right? You show respect and you value women. And again, we could open up that conversation, but that's something that is, I
mm.
think, unbelievably important and integral as a young boy is sort of evolving.
Yeah, I really think we should do a podcast around that at some point. I think that would be really very helpful. On the practical side, before we move away from that one and on to the next part, a practical side, I'd say, when you mentioned communication is definitely the first thing that you want to be able to say, helping your kids, helping your boys learn to communicate well. And one little practical tip that I have found is I have my first son, he would just sit, he would talk all day, he would talk in his sleep, he would talk about everything. And then the next one was the total opposite to that, and it was quite a surprise because I'm so used to all the dialogue. So what I discovered with boys is often if they're not natural talkers where they sit and chat with you, talking while doing something was the key to opening up that dialogue. And it might even be when they're little and they're doing Lego and we're chatting about something when we're doing Lego. As a parent of growing up boys, this 110 hours of L plate driving lessons has been invaluable as
Mm,
far as, that communication, that opportunity to chat and having it be real natural in a confined space and all. But yeah, helping your boys chatting and learning how to talk freely while they're doing something is just a practical tip that I found as a mum has been really
mm.
helpful with a boy that doesn't naturally communicate, you know,
Yeah,
as much.
here's a flip side to that. Let's look at that for a second, because once again, if we start with the preface that we are generally a proxy of our environment as sort of a one big indicator. Now, of course, there is the natural nature of someone, but again, I do believe there's so much of a telltale sign how that's directly correlated to our environment. Meaning, you just said your first son talk, never stop talking. Your second son come along, he probably didn't have time to talk because the first son kept talking and did all the talking for everyone,
It's
right?
true.
Like,
Yes, that's
and
true.
and and that
Yeah.
generally you can look at that over, you know,
Mm,
go and do a survey of thousands and thousands of families with two young
mm,
boys with that age gap, and you'll quickly quite find
mm,
you'll quickly find that yeah, that happened. Or then they either need to compete with the first one, and they'll probably try and talk more because they're trying to get the attention or their way of connection via beating that versus what, I'm not even going to compete with this. I'm actually just not going to talk, and I'll see if I get my fulfillment that way. Because again, you quickly find that um, through environments and how it's been. And this is why it's important as a parent to recognize that. Like, I wouldn't just sit there and go, oh, nah, he's just a quiet son. He doesn't talk. It's like, maybe he doesn't talk in the whole family environment because there could be someone else doing all the talking, maybe even you,
mm, mm,
right?
mm,
Like, so very, very important that we sort of, I think parents have inbuilt spidey senses, like if you allow yourself to step out and actually observe a situation, you're like, yeah, something that is a little bit, I've just put it down to this, or I just thought it was that, or I just thought that they don't like doing this. you know you'll quickly find that there's reasons. Like, the amount of time someone go, oh no, I don't like playing cricket, or I don't like doing that, and you're like, is that true, or are they just don't like doing it here with us, or with this brother or that sister, or this under these circumstances, right? Because we create protection mechanisms, and as children, we don't know how to articulate our thoughts and feelings very well. We're trying to figure it out, and often when you don't know how to articulate your thoughts and feelings, you don't talk about it and you don't share it, and it just becomes that internal sort of toxicity that then's occurring, and it can bleed itself out into physical nature, right, and into
mm,
you know
mm,
different diseases and different circumstances that can arise from that by not allowing ourselves to be able to express. So this sort of ties back to your first point around that ability of stereotypes and empathy. It's like what can happen to that as a disclaimer is you can embark on this as, you know what, this is a great idea. I'm going to let my son know that, hey, you talk to me about anything and I'm here for you and tell me. And then every day you're like, hey, is there anything you need to talk about? Next day, anything you need to talk about? Now you have all intent purposes, you're trying your absolute best to let them know that you're here to communicate on this or that. And you might not be getting back what you need. I would suggest you rearrange the way in which you are potentially putting that out there for them to be able to reach out, because it could be under the circumstance in which you're trying to extract as though there is something wrong. And if we're going, hey, what is it, is there anything, then let them come in their own time and space to be able to have that dialogue so they don't feel like it's a thing, right? So there's so much wrapped up in the way that we can communicate and could, should, ought to communicate as well. But it all starts with us, the parent, as always. And as it relates to raising young men, I think once again the most important thing that we can really do to start with before you go and change the entire strategy is just be aware of how things are currently tracking. What areas would you like to improve if there is any? I'm sure there always is. But then how could you go about creating an environment where it was the natural thing to do, right, for your child?
All right, well, let's leave that part behind and let's actually talk about what homeschooling parents are thinking about, and that is the academic side of the differences in raising boys in and education.
Mm,
There's a study that we had a look at here, and it said that the bottom, here we are, boys comprise nearly two-thirds of the bottom 10% of students. And, and it, and it really hits home when you look at, say, the European way of raising kids and educating. They don't even start kids on reading until 7 years old. Over in Finland, they don't even begin that process. And I know that girls, they just seem to have a readiness about them. It suits them to be creative in that way. And they're, on the whole, they're very well suited to the whole classroom and the structured learning environment. Whereas
mhm,
that doesn't come so naturally to many boys. And one of the things that we see sometimes, because daycare is so expensive, often what parents will think is if we can pop them into school, it's way cheaper. So we'll pop them in there at 4 instead of another whole year of daycare. Totally understandable. It's really expensive. But don't be surprised if by grade 2, you have a boy that's really anti learning, that's really developed these negative feelings about school. Happens
mhm,
around year 2, grade 2 age, where it starts to really bubble up, because very quickly school is so designed to be competitive that even in that first year of, whether you call it prep or foundation or kindergarten, whatever you want to call it, first year of formal learning, they start by saying, here's the first 10 words you need to know and the first 2 sounds you need to know. Next week, they're on to another 10 words and 2 sounds. You've got a boy, say he's 4, he's not even 5 yet. He's not ready to start grasping that. So I can't tell you how many parents I hear coming into homeschool who said, my child's failing at school. So what grade are they in? Oh, they're in foundation and they're failing. I think,
mm.
what does that do to a young boy who's just not ready to
Mm.
start taking on some of these concepts yet? So when it's looking at academics and the way we approach the beginning of learning with boys, I think that's something we really need to talk about.
Absolutely. And it is that it comes back to, again, that's where clear differences are. Like boys at 4 or 5 years old just want to be playing. I went to high school, I'd go early, or even at school, I'd turn up early so I could play touch football on the concrete court. Soon as the school bell went, ran into class sweaty. Soon as we got to our first interval break, back out there on the football field. Like us boys just went to school to go and play football, but we had to go and do subjects in between, right? And and that's just by nature of how we are biologically wired, right? We don't need to go back to the caveman days of the man. The boys are out there hunting with their fathers, running around, providing, and again, this is where we've now been put into a society where we need to operate under certain ways. And to your point earlier around certain stigmas, and this is who you are, and this is how you need to be, and this is how you need to behave. Um, again, we've talked about this a few times in this over the podcast. Is I was absolutely that boy. I all I wanted to do was get out of class, and I realized that maybe if because I didn't want to avoid the work, I actually enjoyed doing the work, but so I thought, well, maybe if I just do the work faster, then I can leave. And I was like, no, then if I did the work faster, I have to sit there and wait. And then that's when I became more distracted because I'd be distracting everyone. And I just, again, to the point where my desk got put out in the hallway and like it was a running joke. But now I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, if I was only, nurtured in some way or had an opportunity to be able to flourish in my way of learning, it would have been something I would love to have seen how that would have went. But back to the point of knowing the differences between boys and girls as they are evolving through life, right? And I I personally, um, I've probably read about maybe 3 or 4 books so far just on early development in young girls because I'm trying to understand different things so I could potentially be pre-prepared, um, to the best of my ability. Obviously you can only be as prepared as you can be. And again, I'm not looking to dot every I, cross every T, because I also think there's something beautiful in nature about something just occurring and you're figuring it out in real time as well. Maybe that's the problem solver in me that loves that part. But knowing that there's clear, distinct differences, and that your son most likely, highly probably, almost definitely does not want to sit at a desk for longer than 30 minutes, 60 minutes at a time before they're moved on to something different. Like it's just,
Mm.
and knowing that, you know what, this is actually naturally normal that this happens. Whilst we have been programmed to believe that, we have to be locked in a classroom for a certain, well, not locked, but I want to give the schooling system its dues, but have to sit in this classroom until such time that you are able to now go out and do, almost like we're in jail, really. Lunchtime, come back, the sirens on, back in the class. Um, that with the beautiful thing that we offer at Euka, especially, is you do, as a parent, have that ability to create a far greater learning environment that biologically suits your child better. I mean, that in itself is like, it's an amazing leap forward and ability for that to happen. Now, you also might have a son that just he wants to sit there and read and go through the work and get stuck into whatever it is, and that's absolutely cool as well. This is where it comes down to being okay if they don't fit your mold, right? And what I mean by that is, um, so I was speaking with Emily this morning, right? Um, my wife, and I'm like, what are you guys up to today? What do you got on? He's like, oh, we're going to go and do some crafts and this and that. She goes, but I have to go here and buy this certain mat because Ayla makes such a big mess. I'm like, yeah, I bet she does. I mean, I'm surprised the house isn't painted from head to toe, to be fair, because, stories I heard of myself when I was a kid, I'm like, okay, well, it's natural. But Emily likes to be nice and tidy and this and that. And I'm like, just because you like to be that, that doesn't mean that that is the parameter of how a 3-year-old must exactly operate. Now, of course, we could teach, hey, tidy up after yourself. Hey, not a good idea to paint the wall. This is how we use the paintbrushes. This is how we do this, et cetera, et cetera. But once again, is a lot of, I think, frustrations from parents come from their child operating outside of their own way of what they would ideally want to be operating themselves personally. And that's not giving your child the fair advantage of setting them up for success, right? It's like giving them your rule book to operate under when you need to almost create their own rule book of how they, again, tied closely back to your family values, et cetera, all of those things. So um,
Mm.
very, very important.
I would I would say that that's one of the things, actually probably one of the draw cards for me, when I stepped into homeschooling, and that was because I did see that need for my boys to have a bit more flexibility in the pace of things. I think it's really fascinating that when we have children, we get, the baby books, and it'll say between 6 and 12 months your child would expected to do such and such. But then once they turn 5, we say all children should be at school. And during that time, this is the things they're going to learn in their first year of foundation. And these are the first things they're going to learn. And there's not that same flexibility. Very quickly, they start having streams in classrooms where these are the kids that are the slow learners and these are the kids that are faster. But they're not, they're on their own right pace. And so one of the things that
Mm,
I do love about homeschooling, and one of the things that certainly we embrace in Yuka, is that your child has a pace of learning and move to that pace. And that means that when week one's work comes to you and there's sight words to learn, if your child hasn't grasped those sight words, don't move on to week two sight words. You might move on to other week two activities, but continue those sight words until they're ready and they're confident, and then move on with that. It doesn't matter if it takes, nobody as an adult says, oh, well, I wasn't really fluently reading until I was 7. Whereas in the school system, if you're not reading by 6, then obviously you're going to need intervention and you're going to need, but slow the pace down to suit your boys, and making sure, like you said, that they have days or times of day where they do need to get out and they need to be using that you're getting their adrenaline going, and it might be a good 10-minute lesson and a half an hour play may achieve far more than a 30-minute lesson and a 10-minute play. So
mm.
trust your instincts as a parent, and don't, once you step out of that mainstream school system, don't try and recreate that at home. Have that freedom to say, well, you know what? He's enjoying this science lesson. We're going to go the whole day. We're not even going to do maths today because we are just really engrossed in what we're creating here in this ecosystem. Great.
Yep.
All of a sudden you can be free to actually say, I can make this work for my son, rather than thinking I have to make him fit into the regime.
Yeah, there's a good book called Atomic Habits, and one of the title sort of talks to what it is about creating habits essentially. And one of the key concepts from the book is there's a concept called habit stacking, right? And it's the ability to be able to do sort of two things at the same time to sort of tick two boxes, right? An example might be, let's say you're in bed and you forget to brush your teeth. You're like, I haven't brushed my teeth tonight. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow morning. Oh, I forgot. Oh, I'll do it tonight. Versus, you know what? A habit stacking would make you, okay, next time when you're in the shower, because there's something you do every day and it's have a shower, right? You shower every single night, no matter what, before you get into bed. And you should. And if you don't, oh. Um, so you shower and you're like, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring my toothbrush into the shower. So I'm going to brush my teeth whilst I shower. So then you're guaranteeing that you're not going to forget to brush your teeth at any time, right? Sort of habit stacking. A really cool thing that you could implement there is, especially with young boys, is their physicality. They want to play games. They want to get out. They want to run. They want to kick a football. They want to swing a stick and do something. You can create, you talked about it there with words in English, whatever lesson you're trying to learn, whether it's mathematics or whether it's English or anything, you can turn it into a game, right? You could literally turn it into a game and let them burn off some of that energy and utilize, and I used to teach a lot of young kids football. And then I'd in my early days of being a fitness trainer, I would go and teach at schools and run sort of like fitness classes at the same time. And I'd play games and I'd have numbers and I'd have this. And I mean, that was that was a fun slash extremely funny hard. We're trying to run 30 kids. I could see the teacher as they're walking the kids out going, whew, I'm glad I don't have to do this. But you can teach whilst you are still exerting energy and doing different things, and that is the other component of it. Like you can have a kid run down, turn that cone over. What is it? Okay, it's 5 apples. Okay, run back, turn this one. What's that? Etc. Etc. You go all the way back, and you could do memory games. Like there's so much, and again, we have so much of that obviously in our program,
Mm,
um,
mm,
but it's once again for us to be able to distill the necessity of this is how you have to teach, and that's I think one of the hardest things for parents as well is that we're so used to and we're locked into this is how school is. This is how it's always been for decades, even when I was at school. So I don't want to change it because I don't want to ruin my child. Don't worry, you're not going to ruin your child. Okay, you're definitely not going to ruin your child. If anything, you might open them up to it. You might find a brand new child in there or elements of a brand new child that's been waiting to come out for some time, because we're finally able to tap into a modality that allows them to open up to a more authentic self, I think is the key.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think honoring those differences that we see in boys is really important, and and I think in the creation of our lessons, certainly in Yuka, we've been very thoughtful about making sure that every single lesson in there has a practical component, because it
Yeah.
overwhelmingly as boys it will say, but why do I need to know this? Like, I remember thinking it as a girl and thinking, I'm not sure why I need green and this poured in here and this is going to create. I just did it, and it was, look, it's not a surprise. 72% of of all expulsions from school are boys, and a big part of that is not connecting with the why am I here? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why is it even valuable? And
Yep.
so embracing the practical side of learning. If like you were saying, yes, there's the games, and in our maths program certainly full of games, but when they are learning new things, they're learning something about science, it'll always have a practical application in there as to why you need to know this about chemicals. Where will you see this out in the real world? And let's go check that out and then come back and go, okay, well, that makes sense. I can see why I need to know that. Let's get into the learning of it. And
Mm,
certainly helps boys to be able to focus on saying when they can actually see the reason why it's worth
mm.
knowing.
And a little hack for parents out there who have children going, why? So something again, and this is sort of hot off the press, that's been sort of weeks in the making. So Ayla's gone into the why, but why? And the easiest reframe for that is, why do you think? You tell me why. And then she stops and thinks about it. Now every time she says why, I look forward to it, because I'm like, well, you tell me. So, well, blah blah. And that again, it because if you don't know how to communicate to your children, they could be coming to you as a sort of a bit of an, you think is being annoying because they're like, why? That could be an SOS to, hey, I just really want to talk to you and engage with you and have a conversation. But the only way I know how to do that is by saying why, because every time I say why, you talk back. And so there's lots of those nuances that sit beneath it all. What we think they are trying to say is not necessarily always what they are trying to say. It's the unheard words that we really want to try and pay attention to. But Alan, um, any final thoughts on this? We want to wrap this episode up. Like I said, we could talk about this for hours. I think we've only just sort of scratched the surface. But any final words, um, as a mother of four young boys, um, what would you like to share with fellow parents out there?
Look, more than anything, I think it's about listening and taking a time to think through, what they are doing, how they're behaving, what they're saying. There's always a root cause to those things, and not to be scared to think, okay, don't use, oh, they're boys as an excuse for something that you don't like, but do
Mm,
think through the fact that they do learn a bit differently. They do require things to be a bit more practical, a bit more hands on, and often you just need to change the way you're parenting to adapt so that you're making sure you're making the most of that fantastic opportunity of raising young men.
mm. There we go. You heard it here first. Okay, let's wrap this one up. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you, again, have gotten any value from this episode of this conversation, please share this with a fellow parent who you believe may also get anything from it as well. Until the next one, thank you so much, Alan. Always enjoy these conversations. See you on the next one.